So, councillors, it's 5:33. We might get started if everyone's ready to go. I declare the Council Agenda Briefing Forum of the 10th of November 2020, held in Council Chambers at the City of Subiaco, open at 5:34 p.m. I welcome councillors, staff, the media and members of the community. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians of this area. We recognise their cultural connection to the land and waterways of Subiaco and their continuing contribution to our city. Welcome, everyone. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed from the city's website. By being present at this meeting, members of the public consent to the possibility that their image and voice may be live streamed to the public. Confidential sections of the council meeting, of course, will not be live streamed or recorded, and recordings will be made available following the meeting. So, councillors, we're at item 2, attendance. We have an apologies from Councillor Mansfield and Councillor Nash. Has anyone heard from Councillor Phelan? Okay. Item 3, disclosures of interest. Do we have any disclosures of interest? Councillor Stroud?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. If we actually go into behind closed doors tonight, I do. And so I'll just read it out. I, Councillor Stephanie Stroud, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on the 10th of November. The agenda item is 7.4, confidential. The type of interest is an indirect financial, pursuant to section 5.61 of the Local Government Act 1995. The nature of my interest is Jollymont Car Service services my car. Mr Dern, who is the proprietor, wishes to lease 23 Bishop for his car service business from the city. I understand that the above information will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting and recorded by the Chief Executive Officer in an appropriate register. Signed by myself, and I've already sent it to Director Hawkins. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stroud. Is there any other further disclosures? Okay. So, councillors, will move to item 6, reports of committees and officers for questions this evening. Our first item is committees reports from the Disability and Access and Inclusion Committee on page 2, D1, matters for information. Do we have any questions on this one? I'll keep moving then. E1, C Subiaco event sponsorship funding allocation on page 7. Any questions on this one? Councillor Hammersley.
Yes, thank you. I've just been considering the applicants, and I see that we have only received 6 applications and that been able to accommodate each of those applicants with the budget. And just looking at the ranking and also the fact that we've only got 6, and I noticed in page 8 it says the previous applicants were contacted, which is fine, but I'm a little bit concerned that we're not growing our reach, and I'm wondering what efforts are being made to attract new people into this space.
Director for Community Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. Thank you for the question. I think it's been an interesting year this year with COVID, and I think it's been very difficult for event organisers to, in some cases, prepare with some certainty. So I think that could be one of the reasons. We do have 2 new applicants who have applied for the round this time, and we're pretty excited to see that with O'Hare Management and WA Opera. So we do see some new people come on board, and like you, we would certainly like to see the more applicants to that fund, and we did discuss at EBSAC that we will be doing a review of the Subiaco sponsorship earlier next year, just to make sure that we've got the criteria right and we're doing the best we can to get the reach. Thank you.
Councillor Hammersley.
So following on from that, so some of these are not new applicants, and in fact some of them are receiving funding for some time, and yet some of the rankings sort of, I don't know, maybe I'm too tough a taskmaster and don't really understand the criteria, but I just wonder about how well we're going with actually, given that they're not like getting 120 out of 120, and some of them are, getting down. I mean, one of them, I think, actually is a new one, though, is 51 out of 120. It's not really on point with what we're looking for, it would seem. And so there's that issue. That's sort of the first element to my question. Like, we don't have to spend money just because it's there if it's not going to reach the criteria. So how are we addressing that issue? And the second issue is around whether these events that people are running who have run other events are actually effective. Because, I mean, I may just have forgotten where it is, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of acquittal information coming through to council about the increased number of local businesses participating, the increased foot traffic. Actually, are we spending money in a way that's actually achieving the criteria, and how are we tracking that?
Director.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. I think in response to the first question, officers certainly wouldn't recommend funding if they didn't believe that the event was worthwhile to Subiaco and would bring benefit to the business in the town centre. So we're certainly not awarding funding for the sake of it, if that helps. You'll see that they've got a criteria that they work through and they rank, and some of the lower rankings might be in terms of the proposed location of the event and things like that, but they still definitely see some real benefit in providing a variety and having a good event schedule for Subiaco in the coming months of 2021. In response to your second question, we definitely have acquittals for all of our funding. It's a firm requirement, and we do get some data back on that, and certainly in terms of businesses participating, that's very important for us. And even when officers, should this funding be successful, officers are working with the event proponents right up to make sure we're getting the maximum reach to all of our businesses so that they can be involved. So we certainly do get that data back, and I think that was both of your questions. Yep, thank you.
Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you for that. It's good to hear that it's there, but where is it? And why don't we see it? Because it's very difficult to be asked to continue with a program when we're not able to satisfy ourselves that actually it's money well spent. And with acquittal, there's 2 issues. There's actually what do they do with the money? And that means we should be seeing invoices, not an invoice from one person saying $15,000 and not telling us, well, we spent, $48 with balloons and, hired a tent that cost us $2,000, and, that actual information about what the money's spent on. But then in terms of what it delivers against our criteria, an estimate of how many people came to the event and those things. And I'm just wondering, where is that information for elected members to see?
Director.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. So firstly, I'll just reassure that the acquittal process is thorough and that we do see invoices and make sure that that officers see that. And we also make sure that the events have delivered against the criteria. We're also able to give some good information on marketing reach and for the stats that we get through our social media channels and websites and such. It's not something that has been reported back up through council routinely. The last round we gave, through the officer reports, we gave a significant overview of previous funding, so gave quite thorough reporting to council on that. But most of the reporting back goes up through ELT and through to EBSAC as well via presentation. So there's no formal process for reporting that back to council currently. Thank you.
So last question is, how would we get that to happen?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, officers can definitely look at a way of sharing that with elected members through the online portal or something like that. We could definitely look at getting that information together.
Any further questions on E1? Councillor Rowe?
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. Look, I know I'm going backwards here a bit, and we've done this before, but I was just wondering at this committee whether they're still talking to Nikki Punky about the tram. It's something that I know we assessed at one stage, and there was a bit of a hindrance, and they didn't put in a business plan or something. But it's a very visual, functional service that she's doing. You see it up and down the road all the time, and it could be improved in regard to promotion on the side of the tram. But I do know they suffer from certain shortage of funds to do things like even repairing the motor, which is obviously smoking a lot, which was criticised at one stage. I mean, you know, there's things like that, promoting the actual service. But I was just wondering if the committee has spoken to her again in recent times. It's out there every day, and every time I look at it, I think, what a fantastic service, linking Kings Park. It's brilliant, but has it come up again in recent times, please?
Councillor, it's probably not entirely relevant for our planning decisions that we're making tonight, but in terms of the question, there has been numerous attempts of the economic development team to engage around, particularly around, as you mentioned, the business case. There's a number of arrangements that the administration need to be certain on, particularly around insurances and how any funding arrangement would work, like we are on any of our other sort of partnership type arrangements. So the conversations continue from time to time, but as far as I'm aware, there's some reasonable first steps that need to be taken to make sure that there's a clear understanding of those matters going forward. Any further questions on E1? I'll move on then to C1. Under 6.2 Officers' Reports, C1, number 138 Bagot Road, Subiaco. Any questions on this one? If not, I'll move to the next one. Councillor Davis.
Thanks, Mayor Taylor. Yes, I'm just trying to get my head around the advertising. Can I just ask through you, Mayor, the figure 2 on page 20 outlines the properties that were advertised to, as I understand it. So that's the properties adjoining 138 Bagot on Bagot Road. Can the planning staff just confirm that?
Thank you. Manager for Planning Services, the question was around advertising and whether it was to just adjoining properties or who it was to. I only repeated that, Councillor Davis, because for the recording we need to have the microphone on.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor Taylor, the figure 2 is not what it was advertised to. That's actually the surrounding area as per our local planning policy. So it was actually advertised to adjoining properties in accordance with our public consultation policy.
Councillor Powell.
Yes, I'd like to ask about the height. Sorry, I'll just go back. Page 17. The height of the building does seem to be quite a bit above the allowable height. Could you address that, please?
What was the question? That it appears a bit above the allowable height? Could you, sorry, Councillor Power, could you just turn them on?
That it seems to be quite tall. In fact, I think about 3 metres over, just on 3 metres over the limit. I think now with it's been reduced to something like 2.7. I was wondering if planning officers could address that issue, please.
Manager for Planning Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. This property is in a section of Subiaco which requires discretion for two-storey houses. That's why it's over the general single-storey height limit. Now, when considering it for the two-storey provisions, what happens is that the natural ground level for this property falls away from Bagot Road to the rear of the property and adds about 1.38 metres on top of that. So if you take into account the natural ground level, it's actually well within what a normal two-storey building would be within that area. It's also well set back from the rear and other properties as well.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, I note that I think it said that the height up had been reduced by 0.3 of a metre after representations by the neighbours. That still equates to about 10% of the over height element. Does that meet the valid planning regulations?
Manager for Planning Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, what it meets is the discretionary framework for considering height at this scale. So for it to meet the absolute requirement, it would need to be a single-storey dwelling. However, there are discretions which are allowable, and in the context, it's recommended that it is consistent with the planning framework and it is recommended for approval.
Councillor Hammersley, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, just carrying on from that, I'd just like to understand. So if this, I think the first thing is commonly second stories are allowed throughout this area and other areas, even though it's single story. Consistently over time, I think I'm observing that there's 2 stories. So with this particular lot with its sloping block, if the designer had chosen to just build the house without the basement and just carry it through so that they got a house that was flat right through by building up a foundation under the house, could they have just gone to this height? I'm trying to understand how the basement complicates or doesn't complicate things. If you could help me, it's not very clear, but I'm just trying to understand if the design had just gone straight out with a big foundation under it, and maybe a place to chuck boats under or something, with the same height, would that be allowable?
Thank you. And through you, Mayor Taylor, the same discretions will exist. So in the planning framework, if you propose excess fill above natural ground level, that's where you'd actually measure the building height from as well. So whether the basement's there or not is immaterial to the actual assessment of the application itself.
One more question. Reading this report, there appears to be no problem with plot ratio. My first question is, does plot ratio apply? And If so, if for any reason this build was forced to drop itself down a little bit, and that had a consequence of pushing the building out into the backyard, how much additional yard might be filled up with building?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, plot ratio is not considered. It's a single house, so there's no consideration of plot ratio. It doesn't apply here. Look, it'd be up to the applicant to consider, you know, the orientation of the house on the ground level. So they could have a wall anywhere typically 1.2 metres away from the neighbouring near residences at the rear. So we can't predict what the applicant may do, but having a lower footprint also means you have a wider footprint and take up some open areas in and around the back, and that means that you can potentially push closer to the surrounding properties as well, as the height of the walls is reduced, and so is the setbacks.
Any further questions on C1, Councillor Davis?
Thanks, Mayor Taylor. It's just further to my previous question. So can we just confirm, so I understand, that the proposal was advertised to what I can work out to be 21 properties noted on figure 2 on page 20, and then an additional series of adjoining properties on Townsend Road and to the north to Park Street. Is that correct?
Manager for Planning Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, I'll have the exact number in a moment. I'll just take that one on notice for now.
Councillor McMullen, did you have your hand up? Any further questions on C1?
Thank you. Just following on that, in accordance with our policy for public consultation, the application was advertised to 10 properties. So it's the properties adjoining the subject site to the rear, to the east, to the west, and across the road on Bagot Road, and also fronting Proclamation Street as well. So it's all the surrounding properties as they adjoin or are across a road and adjoin the subject site. It's 10 properties.
I think I had Councillor Powell's hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just one final one. The neighbours have also raised questions about solar access and about visual privacy. Could you address those, please?
Through Mayor Taylor, the application is compliant with those two matters.
Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. On the plans, it shows 2 windows, one on the top floor and one on the floor where the kitchen is, if that's the ground floor. I'm not quite sure how I should be describing the floors. And they are to be louvered or opaque, I think. That was something I've picked up in the plan or somewhere. Is the reason that those particular windows, they're only relatively small windows, are to be screened or opaque, or maybe it's in the conditions, I think, actually. I think it's in the conditions, that's right. Is that because their cone of vision being closer to the western side boundary, that they have to be screened for that reason? Just they're within the cone of vision for that particular part. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Taylor. Yes, that's correct. The ARCODES provides you an option to either set back within behind the cone of vision, or to have obscuration at a certain height limit at 1.65 metres. So as it's proposed, and that's been reflected with the condition on the planning approval as well.
Thank you for that answer. Through you, Mayor. The windows that are on the upper floor at the staircase facing east, they are not to be opaque because it seems it's been defined or classified as a non-habitable space. But could that not, because it's an extension of it's an open sitting area up there that leads to the stairway, could those windows, could they be defined as part of a habitable space and therefore require some treatment for privacy? I mean, is it possible to stretch the definition or even without stretching it? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. I believe the R-Code's definition is quite definitive on stairs not being considered habitable space, so I don't think we'd be able to stretch that condition, stretch that definition in that manner, unfortunately.
Thank you. I'll move on now to C2. Draft Local Planning Policy 2.1, preparation for advertising. Any questions on this item? Councillor Powell? Was that no?
Sorry, yes, I do. I was just looking for my notes on this. Yes, it was in regard to car and bicycle parking. It was 5 and point D for very small hole-in-the-wall style restaurant cafe uses without on-site sit-down dining area, not including alfresco dining. The parking requirement may be waived. Now, if the small hole in the wall turns out to be quite popular, isn't that going to cause problems, parking problems potentially with the neighbours?
Manager for Planning Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. That's why there's the word may in there, and there's always a consideration for discretion on whether parking requirements will be enforced or required. Essentially, in these areas where we're trying to encourage vibrant cafe development, it's generally quite close to larger roads or existing public transport networks to actually allow for people to grab a coffee on the way and so forth. So generally smaller scale cafes and hole in the walls don't have the attraction as a larger cafe, where you wouldn't necessarily have people coming in because they can't necessarily go in and dine and dine in there. So there's generally a lesser demand and more of a convenience factor of people passing by or walking through, or people of high density developments using the hole in the wall type stuff. And again, it's just a discretionary item. So if we do consider in the assessment stage that it will have a raised parking issues, then we can actually capture it as well.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. So this one's come out of left field a bit, really. I'm quite surprised about it, especially when you see the highlighted areas in the attachments that it could apply to, and albeit that we've got some conditions here that you've just been discussing. If public opinion comes back that they feel a bit nervous about this, can we discipline our LPS 5 to say you can't do this in S80, R80 plus areas? Is it legal for us to say no if the public came back and said, no, we're not happy, that we don't want a cafe popping up next door to our house or something?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. This is a provision that was carried over from Town Planning Scheme number 4 into Local Planning Scheme number 5, so it's always been there, and the whole point of this policy is to provide council with some ability to consider discretion on how these proposals should happen, and I guess consistent with the city's local planning strategy, we do want to encourage some sort of mixed-use development, and high density is probably the place to do it. If council didn't want cafes in our R80 zones, and they can commence a scheme amendment to seek to remove that, and then that will be subject to ministerial consideration, as is the normal process.
Any further questions on C2? Councillor Hammersley.
Yeah, this is really about whether this is going to actually have any force. If under the scheme people can decide to, if they've got an R80 zoning and they decide they want to put in a cafe, isn't it the case there's nothing we can do to stop them?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. It's a discretionary consideration, so council could resolve to refuse the cafe component of it. However, what this policy seeks to do is should an applicant try to do that, it provides them some ability or considerations to say, hey, let's put this in an area that's going to have the least amenity impact on lower scale residential areas. So it's providing guidance and to guide council's discretion in an application that might come through. Without it, we rely on the standard provisions of the regulations.
If there's no further questions, I'll move to C3, revocation of local planning policy. Any questions on C3, councillors? Councillor Hammersley.
One quick one. I just noticed in the executive summary about the middle of the page, it says it's outdated and where relevant captured in contemporary planning documents. And it has in their planning bulletin 722009, childcare centres. How is that actually incorporated into our planning framework?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, the deemed provisions actually provide to consider any other relevant consideration, and the planning bulletin serves as a guide to people who are preparing childcare centres as general planning guidance, and then we have the considerations in our scheme and our objectives and the deemed provisions of the regulations to consider such matters.
Any further questions on C3? We'll move then to C4, awarding of tender for street lights and park maintenance. Any questions on C4? Councillor Hammersley.
Sorry, I seem to have all the questions. Yeah, I was just noticing the rankings and the panel's views, and this is just one where I gather it's 65 out of 100. And again, just a comment on, is that an adequate score, do we think, or should we be casting our net wider and looking for someone with more experience?
Acting Director for Technical Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. It looks low, but it is an adequate score. It's once again assessed to criteria as per the tender documentation. The evaluation is done by independent personnel who don't discuss it, so they can score differently, which often, one person might believe that's an 85 and somebody a 70, so it tends to work its way out that way more than anything else. But yes, definitely considered suitable for being able to carry out the works, have the suitable experience and qualifications.
Further questions on C4? I'll move then to C5, financial statements and reports for the month ending 30th of September. Any questions on C5? I'll move then to C6, matters for information. Any questions on matters for information? Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you. Yeah, I just noticed on page 42 that the staff have let us know that the Subiaco East draft master plan, I think what it's saying is that process is finished and so reports to us will finish as well, which does make sense. But could I then assume that the continuing work that the staff might be doing on Subi East will just come to us through the EMIB?
Through the Mayor, where no decisions are made or required to be made, certainly information reports will come through the EMIB, but we anticipate there'll be more likely to be briefings, as we have one scheduled for next month, I think. But there'll also be decisions to be made, so that will require reports to Council.
If there's no further questions on C6, I'll move to our matters behind closed doors. Before I move to close the meeting, though, as was requested last time, I'll ask if there's any questions on these matters to see whether we do need to go behind closed doors, because if there's no questions, we don't need to. Is there questions? Councillor Stroud? Sorry, I'm just getting some advice from the CEO. Councillor Stroud, if we don't have any matters, it's not like it's a decision making, so they have to come forward. But the CEO has advised that because there's... just give me 1 minute. Okay, so we actually won't be discussing questions on the items from P1 to P7. These reports will be presented at the council meeting and can have questions and answers and discussion on them then. So we don't need to go behind closed doors, and we won't have any questions on them. I think it's fine. If we don't discuss it, it doesn't really matter. It's foreshadowing it for next week for now. So, councillors, I declare the City of Subiaco Council Agenda Briefing Forum of the 10th of November 2020 closed at 6:11 p.m. Thank you everyone for your time.